Okay, let's dive in. We are unpacking a text today that honestly offers one of the most compelling inversions of modern clinical thinking I've come across recently.
Hmm.
It's drawn from something the author calls the curriculum of touch. And, well, it's this really radical exploration of autistic attunement, queer memory, intimacy. It just fundamentally challenges how science, the traditional kind, defines knowledge and social skills. Connection, even.
That's absolutely the mission here.
Yeah.
We're basically going to unpack this central argument that the dominant academic story, the one that tends to see the autistic experience almost entirely through this lens of deficit,
Right.
is just wrong.
Yeah.
Or at least incomplete. The source material argues that what often gets labeled as, social difficulty is actually a highly developed kind of sensory literacy.
Sensory literacy. I like that.
Yeah, it's presented as this powerful counter story, a counter-canon to the usual medical literature.
And the thing that hooks you right away, I think, is the setting, this curriculum, this knowledge. It wasn't learned in a sterile clinic or a university lab.
No, not at all.
The author traces its roots back to the pulsing, sometimes pretty dangerous heart of San Francisco, specifically the Tenderloin district back in the late 1980s.
And that environment is so key. It immediately grounds what could be a very abstract discussion in this really visceral, real-world place. A place where, frankly, survival often depended on these non-neurotypical ways of knowing.
Yeah, the author describes the late 80s Tenderloin not as just chaos, but as a sensorium. You have to picture it, right? The city breathing smog and neon, the constant low hum of traffic, people living really close together.
Intense.
And for someone who maybe wasn't fluent in, let's say, neurotypical small talk,
Yeah.
this whole environment was described almost like music dense, layered, kind of improvisational. The author says their own autistic perception wasn't too much. It was just enough there.
That's such a crucial insight, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it completely flips that idea of sensory overload. If you're in an environment where basically everyone is operating outside the quote-unquote norm, the whole rulebook changes. The source really emphasizes how that specific ecosystem, drag performers, runaways, various marginalized folks, they develop their own specialized way of communicating.
A kind of syntax.
Exactly, a syntax. The author calls it a pedagogy of proximity. Connection, it argues, relied almost entirely on nonverbal, super nuanced cues.
And the details of that language are just fascinating. The text mentions things like eye contact as semaphore,
Wow.
perfume as punctuation, and even silence as statement. It sounds like this really high-stakes, subtle language. Like, if you broke eye contact too quickly, maybe that signals danger.
Or threat.
Or threat. Hold it too long, maybe that's predatory. The right glance had to be, steady, warm, but somehow untranslatable by outside norms.
And this sensory literacy, it wasn't just, for socializing like we might think. It was absolutely essential for staying safe, for survival.
How so?
You had to literally read the temperature of the street. You'd map the neighborhood, not by street signs necessarily, but by these very specific frequencies. Things like the low hum of a particular motel's compressor,
Okay.
the exact reverb of bus brakes on that corner, even the changing density of the air. It's incredibly detailed sensory mapping.
That sounds like a constant, high-level pattern recognition task just running in the background.
It absolutely was. The essential trade, the currency in that community, as the author describes it, was deep attunement.
Attunement.
Yeah, you had to let your instinct and this pattern recognition become like a second skin. Learning to gauge safety, intention, trust, all in milliseconds. Every tiny gesture, a shared breath, and maybe especially what wasn't said or done, the omissions, carried huge meaning. It was a system built to prioritize information that, neurotypical environments often just filter out as noise.
So, okay, we have this really profound, highly functional system, embodied communication, honed in a community that valued signal over maybe superficial chatter. How does that stack up against how academic research, the establishment view, sees these same individuals?
Oh, well, that's where the contrast becomes really stark and kind of urgent. We compare that lived reality with clinical studies. The source points to academic reviews like one by Beluzzo and colleagues expected in 2025, apparently, which uses what the author terms the grammar of deficiency.
The grammar of deficiency, what does that actually sound like? What kinds of things are they measuring or focusing on?
Well, it tends to catalog autistic individuals primarily by what they're perceived to lack. Even if the researchers come in clothed in empathy, as the text puts it, the findings often end up highlighting things like poor sexual health, difficulty forming romantic relationships, or heightened risk of victimization. The source argues this clinical gaze is just sterile. It treats the autistic body like a problem to be solved or just a data point.
So it measures things like desire, connection, but only about how far they deviate from some assumed neurotypical normal.
Exactly. It measures that distance.
Yeah.
The core critique here isn't necessarily that autistic people are unskilled in intimacy per se, but maybe that the researchers are trying to measure fluency in the wrong language.
They were always fluent, just in another dialect.
Precisely. That's it. And if traditional research relies heavily on, say, surveys and questionnaires, the author clearly needed a different approach to even capture this dialect.
Oh, right.
They describe their own counter-research as being done with skin, not surveys.
Wow.
The instruments are things like heartbeats, silence, the shared rhythm of staying. It's research literally written from the body outwards.
And using that methodology, it seems to lead to these really radical reframings of behaviors that clinicians might often label as negative or, symptoms, like behavior seen as awkward or slow.
Yeah.
How does the author reanalyze those?
They find the agency within them. So awkwardness gets reframed as a form of honesty.
Honesty.
Because, the argument goes, it's often a refusal to perform some kind of smooth social script that just feels fundamentally unnatural or untrue to the person.
Okay, that makes sense.
And slowness. That becomes precision. Autistic love, the text tells us, can be intensely precise because, as it says, they study the world through detail and texture. They're paying close attention to all those signals most people filter out just for, social expediency.
That focus on detail and texture, it brings us right to maybe the most powerful inversions in the text about core sensory traits. Let's start with that persistent idea, the stereotype, really, that autistic individuals somehow lack empathy or are maybe just hypersensitive. The source material just completely rejects this, right?
Absolutely. The argument flips it entirely. The perception of lacking empathy, it suggests, is actually often a case of possessing maybe too much fidelity.
Too much fidelity.
Yeah, like a sensory aperture left wide open. What clinicians might diagnose as sensory overload, the author reframes as resolution. It's like the inability to turn the volume down on the world's input.
That framing, what they call overload, I call resolution. That's really stunning. How does that kind of high-definition processing actually manifest in, say, a relationship or an intimate moment?
Well, if intensity is resolution, then every single piece of sensory data gets magnified, right? So tone becomes weather. A shift in someone's posture is a whole paragraph. The author describes engaging in physical intimacy and being able to read the entire story written in the other person's muscle tone and microtremor.
So reading hesitations, permissions.
Exactly. Reading the unwritten consent or lack thereof in real time directly from the body signals. And that actually requires, maybe counterintuitively, this incredibly intense relational focus and presence.
That level of detail processing sounds, exhausting maybe, but also unbelievably honest. Which leads us to the concept of alexithymia, that clinical term for difficulty finding words through emotions. How does this curriculum manage to flip that into a kind of badge of radical honesty?
It's fascinating. The idea is that the experience of the emotion often bypasses the part of the brain that's busy forming grammar and language. Emotions are felt more like verbs unfixed, shimmering in motion.
Verbs, not nouns.
Right. They arrive under the skin long before they can be neatly categorized by the tongue.
So the perceived failure isn't really the individuals. It's more like a failure of language itself to keep up with the intensity, the reality of the experience.
That's precisely the argument. It becomes a refusal to lie by translation. It's about trusting the body's immediate visceral syntax over the often clumsy approximations of the tongue. The source insists that autistic authenticity, in this view, does not perform. It reveals.
It reveals.
Yeah. They don't just speak emotion, they enact it. They might communicate, I love you, not with the words, but through, say, a carefully extended hand, or a breath held in perfect synchrony with another person, or just a shared, profound stillness. It's communicated through action and presence, not just words.
That focus on presence, on synchrony. It seems to lead straight into this idea of attunement as a form of erotic communication. The source talks about Gestalt processing, which clinically is often misunderstood as just mimicry, right? Like echoing. How does this reframed view see that behavior?
Well, that Gestalt processing, where meaning arrives whole, melodic, sensorial, almost like taking in the whole picture at once, is presented as relationship itself. It's not imitation, it's deep resonance. And where the clinical view might see repetition, like echolalia, as pathology, the author highlights its role in intimacy. Repetition is reframed as devotion.
Devotion. That's a profound shift. How is repetition devotion?
Because in this particular sensory dialect, repeating a sound or a phrase or even a physical gesture can be a powerful form of regulatory co-rhythm. It creates safety. The text literally says, again means I'm still here. Again means this is safe now. It's the language through which deep trust learns to breathe. It's all about creating a predictable shared rhythm, which is incredibly grounding for a nervous system that's potentially operating at that constant high resolution we talked about.
That makes perfect sense when you put it that way. Safety through reliable, recognizable patterns. And their author is continuing this work now, acting as what they call a living archive and providing a kind of counter-education. Looking back, they describe the Tenderloin as maybe the first truly intentional autistic community. They recognized one that was fluent in signal, not in small talk.
Exactly. And strategically, they're documenting this embodied knowledge, this archive, through something called the Afterglow project. And interestingly, using platforms like Literotica for some of the erotic writing.
Literotica, that's unexpected. Why that venue?
The choice is deliberate. It's described not just as a place to publish, but as actual pedagogy.
Pedagogy.teaching.
Yeah.
In an erotic writing venue. What's the syllabus there?
It offers, and I'm quoting loosely here, a kind of syllabus, a map of boundaries, consent, and reciprocity, all documented through lived, embodied experience.
Yeah.
The author recognizes the vulnerability of this material, this archive of what they call queer and trans eros, and the need to house it somewhere safe, maybe outside traditional institutions that might not understand or value it.
Or might censor it.
Precisely. As they warn, when the regime begins to call anything queer pornography, this record of intimate lives, pleasure, and the crucial lessons they offer about embodied consent, well, it needs protection from being erased or censored.
Wow, that's a really powerful act. Using a platform often associated just with sexuality as a secure historical archive for intimate queer and autistic history, it really grounds that idea that, the classroom can be anywhere two people meet with intention, and the textbook is the body itself.
It ties everything back to the beginning, doesn't it? The whole text is essentially arguing for the validity of knowledge that comes from non-standard sources, from the streets, from the skin, from the nervous system itself.
So wrapping this up, what does this whole curriculum really mean for the rest of us, for you listening? I think the core takeaway is this deeply restorative view. A rich, well-lived autistic life, according to this source, isn't about desperately trying to compensate for excess sensitivity, but about learning to compose with it.
Absolutely. And this archive, it preserves the sensory residue, the feeling of a time and place, the Tenderloin, that's rapidly vanishing because of gentrification, historical erasure. It's a vital, intimate record of how marginalized people learn to speak in code, to trust through vibration and presence, and to build belonging entirely outside of mainstream, neurotypical ways of understanding. It reminds us that communication isn't always about being smooth. Sometimes it's just about being truly understood on your own terms.
And maybe, as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on, pulled right from the heart of this curriculum. If intensity can be resolution, and if slowness can be precision, what other traits, maybe in ourselves, maybe in others' traits that society often dismisses as a deficit, or just awkwardness or failure, might actually be a highly specialized, deeply nuanced form of communication, just waiting for us to tune into the right frequency to finally understand it?